what's digital governance and how do you get it? So first of all, digital governance is an organizational concern, right? It's also a content concern, but the way that Lisa, frames digital governance is around deciding what the roles and responsibilities and accountability for online publishing and development, right? So when you think about it, there's a lot of stuff that you put online. There's a lot of people who touch things, not just the content, but actually the systems that the content flows through, the actual servers that it's sitting on. There's the design aspects. Your online presence is a very, very complex thing, and it has a sophisticated set of resources that manage it. And oftentimes, organizations just have not stopped to think about who's doing all this stuff, who's doing what, where, and when. Down your own sort of content silo, you can see that manifesting, right, already just for content. So if you blow it up even larger and think of everything that digital encompasses, it's a real problem. And so digital governance frameworks really only clarify that. It's not about a process or a workflow. It's really who's supposed to make decisions about policy, who's supposed to make decisions about strategy, and who's supposed to make decisions for standards, including things like editorial standards, right? So a lot of times the reason why you argue about those things is because you actually have never sat down and figured out who's actually accountable for that, right? So you get in a room, you're on a project, you're all sitting around a table, you're trying to make a decision about things, and you're debating, right? And you don't actually know where the buck stops. So that's really the frame of digital governance. And as I just mentioned, there's really only 4 main components that I'm looking to tune. One of them is the team, right? So who's on that team? What are they doing? The other one is who on that team is actually defining strategy, right? Who's accountable for that? Digital strategy. Who on that team is actually going to be authoring and storing policies? And who's going to be authoring and storing standards? So this doesn't maybe seem particularly exciting, but I think if you just sort of rest back in your head a little bit and you think about some of the dynamics that you work in your organization and the way that you think about it, you'll find that a lot of these dynamics are not clear, right? You're not really sure how they pan out. So I just want to dive a little bit down on the team component of this because I want you to, if anything, walk away understanding the richness and complexity of the digital team. So when I'm working with people and trying to figure out a digital governance framework for them, and I'm looking at the team, usually the people who've kind of rung us up on the phone to ask us for help are members of the core team. So if you're in a large organization or even a small one, there's usually some aspect of the team that you consider to be the main digital team or the key web team or whatever. And so if you just think in your head about either a team that you're working with or your own organization, if I asked you, where's your web team? You're probably going to snap to grid to something, like almost immediately. That most likely is your core team, right? And that core team is responsible for enabling the rest of the organization to get digital governance done effectively. At Intel, as you'll hear from Scott later on, he's an integral part of that core team. So that core team is probably going to help store policies and author policies. They're probably going to define the digital strategy for the organization, and they're probably going to make the rules about what you make, including editorial standards. So they're going to be writing standards. They're also going to be making sure that those standards are actually disseminated to everyone else on the team, and I'll talk about the other aspects of the team. They're going to make sure that those standards are actually implemented effectively, right? And they're going to make sure that those standards are effectively measured so you know whether or not actually folks are following the rules. So it seems like a really simple system, but if you pull out of the core and you start looking at the distributed team, those are the people who are making things. Usually if you're a core team member, right, and you're making standards and you're trying to control this core and hold it together, the distributed team gets on your nerves. Right? So these are all the business silos. These are the silos, right, that everybody likes to talk about, that they're snapped onto their particular business emphasis. They think they have special needs, blah, blah. There's a whole list of things. They want to make rules of their own. They want to put up their own site. Their content needs to be like this and not like that, right? So these are usually the aggravators. And the reality is the dynamic between the core team and the distributed team is a real sort of yin and yang sort of thing that is actually necessary. The reality is there's validity from both perspectives. Those business units and people outside the core do have special needs. They do have a different focus. And when you look at it through the lens not just of the content, but of the people that are creating the content, those people are compensated and rewarded differently than people in the core, right? They win when they do something for their silo. So the idea isn't necessarily to break down silos, because if you thought about the number of people in a large organization and then you broke down all the walls of the silo and they were all sort of milling around the cornfield, that's kind of a mess, right? So people have to work in silos. You have to work in small groups. You know, organizational design will tell you that. Once you get past a certain number of people, when you think about agile development, it just doesn't work anymore, right? It's not as effective. So what you want are connected silos. And you want silos that are operating against the same standards-based framework and accountable for the same dynamics.